Welcome to LFPL's At the Library series, an ongoing podcast featuring author talks, programs, and events at the Louisville Free Public Library. For more information about upcoming events, visit us online at www.lfpl.org/upcoming events.
We introduce our moderator, and our moderator will introduce the rest of the panel. Ashleé Clark is a manager at the American Journalism Project, a nonprofit organization that supports the growth of local news across the country. She's the author of the book Louisville Diners, which was published in 2015. Her writing has appeared in the book The Louisville Anthology, Salon, The Washington Post, CNET, and other publications. I should also mention she's very proud that she is a 4-time Golden Girls trivia winner. The host of the Moth Story Slam, and even better, perhaps, proud card holder since 1989 of a Louisville Free Public Library card. So please welcome Ashleé Smith, Michelle Tyrene Johnson, Kelly Hill, and Erin Keane.
Yeah, I was a Shavley Newman branch person. Shout out, anybody? Lively Shavley. Yes. Okay, with the tank outside. You know what I'm talking about. Okay, so before I introduce our lovely panelists, can I just see a show of hands? Who in here is a writer?
Yes.
Okay. And who in here is just like an avid reader? You can be both. Okay, awesome. Well, we're going to leave some time at the end to ask questions. So feel free to kind of like take some mental notes as we discuss writing and our writing labs. First, I'm just going to go down the row. We have Michelle Tyrene Johnson. Michelle Tyrene Johnson is a senior producer at Louisville Public Media, a writer, and a former attorney. As a playwright, Johnson's plays have been staged nationally. Several of her plays have been in New York City festivals and readings. Other acclaimed plays by Johnson include Justice in the Embers, The Green Duck Lounge, The Green Book Wine Club Train Trip, and Coloring Between the Lines. Her commissioned play, Only One Day a Year, was selected for the Kennedy Center's New Visions, New Voices Festival in 2020, was the recipient of a $30,000 grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. So you're picking up drinks after this?
The theater got that right.
And had its world premiere at Coterie Theater in 2023. Johnson received her MFA in writing with an emphasis on playwriting in May 2022 from Spalding University. Oh yeah, you can clap after. Yeah. All right. Next, we have Kelly Hill. Kelly holds an MFA in fiction from Spalding University and a PhD in humanities from U of L. She teaches at both Spalding and U of L. Her writing has appeared in various literary journals. A Home for Friendless Women is her first novel, and it will be available March 19th. She'll also be reading at Carmichael's on Frankfort Avenue on March 20th. So make sure I'll mark that on your calendars. So thank you, Kelly. And now we have Erin Keane. Erin is a critic, poet, essayist, and journalist. She's the author of Runaway, Notes on the Myths That Made Us from Belt Publishing, one of NPR's best books of 2022, as well as 3 collections of poetry, and editor of the Louisville Anthology from Belt Publishing. Her writing has appeared in many publications, anthologies, and public radio programs, and she was co-producer and co-host of the limited audio series These Miracles Work, a Hold Steady podcast. She's chief content officer at Salon.com and teaches in the Naslund-Mann Graduate School of Writing at Spalding University. So I want to talk a little bit about your journeys to becoming a writer. When was the first moment you realized, oh man, I think I'm a writer? No particular order, answer at will.
Everyone turned and looked at me. I don't know why, but I got the mic out first, so I'll go first. I think, when I was like 6 years old, I would draw these little comic strips featuring my cat and make up, either reflect funny little incidents that happened that were not actually complete stories, like someone scared the cat and the cat's tail puffed up and woo, I don't know, that wasn't really, that's just where the story ended. And and I like to like make things up. I was an indoorsy kind of child and read a lot, of course. And so that eventually just ended up, channeling my own thoughts onto the page when I had read every book in the house and couldn't get out to get more. So, but I think probably in, I don't know, maybe middle school, early high school, like I wrote some terrible short stories that got picked for some terrible school, honor or something and are bound somewhere in my parents' attic. And that, gave me enough of an ego boost to make me think, oh, perhaps I should consider doing this more. People seem to like it. So I guess maybe, I would say like, I don't know, like 14, 15 or so.
What about you two?
I'd say the same thing. Like, I remember waiting to go out to dinner with grandparents. I was like 6 or 7, and I wrote a short story. It was like a ripoff of Peter Rabbit. And my mom found it, and she's like, who wrote this? And she said it in a way where I thought maybe I was going to get in trouble. I was like, I did. And she's like, just for fun? You just wrote that? And I was like, yeah. And I think from that, like that moment, you're like, oh, right, that's not what everybody does. They don't kill time by writing like a Peter Rabbit riff. And then for a long time, I was like, I'm not a writer. And then in my 20s, I was like, no, I think I do want to be a writer. So I was really confident about it as a kid. And then as a teenager, not at all. And then after I became a mom, I think I kind of decided that's what I wanted to do.
Can you talk a little bit more about that, being really confident when you were younger and losing some of that? Do you think that's a unique experience to women writers, or how do you get that confidence back?
That's a great question. I don't know if it's unique to women writers or if it's just maybe public school doesn't always allow a lot of creative writing. And I think I thought writing had to be journalism, it had to be writing for the newspaper, which I didn't love. So I'm sure if there had been more creative writing opportunities, I probably would have, like Erin said, written a lot of sort of cringy short stories at 15 or 16. Instead, I think I had this very narrow idea of what being a writer was, whereas as a kid, you don't really censor yourself.
What about you, Michelle?
I'm just realizing, listening to you all, that I did not write creatively as a child or as a teenager. But damn if I didn't consume every bit of of other people's creativity. Between reading and watching TV, I'm an only child, so it was like, books were my brothers and TV was my sisters, and so I was always playing. I had an indulgent family that's like, okay, Shell's quietly, in her room, we good. And so then, but I went into journalism. I was a newspaper reporter. Was big on the newspaper when I was in college. Then I graduated, became a newspaper reporter. Then I went to law school. Then I was a lawyer for 8 years, which I realized that was a mistake after day one. And then I've done various things. But I didn't start writing plays until I was 46. Like, I wrote nonfiction. I had 4 nonfiction books that I've written. And I know that's like, I say that like it's just nonfiction, but there's something about writing something creatively, like plots and people and characters. And I didn't start that till I was 46. And I've been doing that for 13 years. You can do the math. And I guess I must have had a lot of pent up stories to write, because I've been writing like a fiend ever since.
So what advice would you have, Michelle, for folks who maybe weren't writing terrible short stories in their teens? I also have my terrible short story was a riff on Saved by the Bell. Like, it was not good. But yeah, what advice would you give folks who didn't come to it when they were kids?
That's kind of the beauty of it. Like, being a a 46-year-old Black woman in the Midwest. I lived in Kansas City. Y'all, this is not the Midwest. I'm from Kansas City. I know we're not gonna go there. We're not gonna go there.
No,
okay?
I am in agreement.
Okay, all right,
We see
Okay,
eye to eye.
that's okay. And so, I pretty much had nothing to lose when I started writing. I mean, that's the difference between starting writing, actively in mid-40s versus as a kid. Because when you're a kid and a teenager and even in your 20s, everything feels like judgment. But at my age, it's like, okay, if I write it and it sucks, oh well, it sucks. Did my check clear at work? And with that mentality, it just, I don't know. And I don't know. I would just say, just know that there's never anything to lose when you write. I mean, nobody ever has to see anything that you write. Now it seems like everybody sees everything that I write, because for some reason when I write a play, somebody at least wants to do a reading of it. So that creates a different kind of pressure. But, it's just be fearless.
So we have a lot of genres represented up here: poetry, fiction, playwriting, creative nonfiction. Can you talk about the process you go through when you have a story to tell and deciding what genre to write it in?
Let's take a look at Erin.
Okay, yeah, everyone looks at me. I mean, ideas start as, or I guess projects start as little ideas, but even something as small as maybe a line or an image or sometimes just like a really overwhelming feeling that's hard to explain. And I find the second that I sit down to just start to kind of, sketch out some notes on something, it becomes what it wants to become. But I also don't, I cycle through genres a lot. I went through a whole several years of not writing poems after publishing several collections. And my MFA was in poetry, and I had really focused on that for quite some time. But I do have a hard time switching back and forth really handily. I'm getting better at it because I'm sort of training myself to do that more. But yeah, these days I really have to come up sort of with an assignment for myself. And often it's okay, if an idea won't leave my head, the way that I know if it's part of a poem or if it's something like an essay or something longer, maybe it wants to stretch out into something longer in fiction that I'm not going to talk about right now, is how it sort of rattles around in my head. Is it just a line? If it's just a line, then that, to me, that's okay, I'm going to write this line and see where it goes, and it often becomes a poem. But if it feels like it wants to be expansive and wants to sort of take on a whole sort of cinematic life of its own in my head, then it probably wants to become some sort of fictional something. And if my inner monologue takes over and starts to analyze it, then it's going to be an essay.
Can you talk a little bit, just knowing about Runaway and how that came to be?
Yeah, I mean, so I grew up sort of understanding that my family's story was maybe a little different from my friends' families' stories, but I didn't really ever think that it was a tragic story necessarily, or not. I thought of it as a different kind of tragedy than it actually was. So the facts of my parents' life were this: my mother ran away from home for the first time when she was 13 years old. It was the early 1970s. My grandfather was career military, and she was very much the black sheep of the family. She ran away to New York City, and she met my father, who was her father's age, and a recovering heroin addict. And they got married when she was 15. Had my brother when she was 17 and me when she was 19. And then he died when I was 5 years old. And so that's sort of in a nutshell, my family of origin story. And it wasn't really until, and I always just thought it was sort of kind of glamorous, You know, I mean, like, you should have seen my mom was such a babe, right? and it was like the 70s in like downtown Manhattan, like the East Village, you know, everything cool that I ever read about happened there, right? Including my parents' marriage, I guess. And it really wasn't until much, much later. I'm a very slow learner. I'm a journalist. I was covering the Me Too movement, and it really made me start to understand the age difference and the power differential in my parents' relationship in a much different light. They were not from families or communities where teen marriage. If teen marriage was the norm, it was like, oh, we're 18, we've graduated high school, and like, you know, we're setting up house. This was to understand and to go back and learn and sort of report on my own family and find out exactly why two sets of parents let this happen. Not just my mother's parents who didn't know about it at the time, but my father's parents who were there. That made me really reconsider my entire family on both sides, and like essentially what I came away from in writing the book was understanding that the coverage of the Me Too movement as it pertains to like celebrity and high profile men is that these men aren't actually special. They're just in headlines because everybody knows their name, but that like in every community, in many families, there are these stories play out time and time again, you know, pretty much everywhere. And that was to me, that was like a really, as somebody who is, you know, a culture journalist also, and who thinks kind of deeply about celebrity and its role in our lives, made me kind of understand celebrity a little differently as well, and notoriety too. So everyone's you know, every sort of like minorly prominent man is a celebrity in somebody's life, basically, it seems like. And with that, all of the potential for exploitation and abuse of power that can go with that.
And Kelly, your upcoming novel that's going to be out March 19th, can you talk about how you came to write that? Because that's an interesting story as well.
Yeah, so I was in the PhD program, and if you're in a PhD program, everybody already knows what they're writing about, and I did not know what I was writing about, so I sort of had imposter syndrome. And I was working as an intern at the Filson Historical Society, and it was a very glamorous job. I would help like catalog their parasol collection, or like help hang
Wait a minute,
paintings,
wait.
which was actually pretty cool.
Yeah,
There's an extensive parasol collection. But I would help like unwrap paintings and help put them on the wall. And so I worked with the director of the Historical Society a lot. And one day we were unwrapping a painting, and he's like, oh, that's Mr. So-and-so. He helped found the Home for Friendless Women. And I had no idea what that meant, but I became completely obsessed with that term, friendless. Like, I sort of ignorantly thought it just meant like these women didn't have friends, so they made a home for them, and that's not what it means. That was just a euphemism for like you were pregnant and not married. But I became just so captivated by this home, and I got to read through the record books. I got to like read the people who would write letters to this home saying, can you take in my daughter? Can you take in my neighbor? And like reading through the records, I just saw that there was a lot of judgment heaped on this women, and there was a lot of absence around who they were. So they were just like pernicious women. They were bad women. They were, you know, they could not follow the rules. And so I wanted to tell their story, and really use fictional tools to do that, since so much of their story was lost to the records.
So, Michelle, how did you come to plays?
Oh, that one's easy. Twitter. Believe it or not, Twitter. So I had written novels and short stories, and that's not my ministry. But when I got on Twitter in 2011, I saw that there were people that, I don't know how to put it, give you writing opportunities. Like this theater is looking for this book companies looking for this, like writing opportunities. And I was like, and I saw a tweet that said that they were looking for 10-minute plays by Black women. And this was out of New York City. And my first two thoughts were, there are 10-minute plays? And Black women write plays? Because in my mind, the only two Black women who wrote plays are like Lorraine Hansberry and Shaka Chonge. I'm like, oh, other people write plays? And so I took one of my short stories and I turned it into a 10-minute play. And it was terrible. But I loved writing it because what people had always said about my novels and the short stories is, oh, you're so great at characterization and dialogue. The rest, meh. So I just... So I got rid of the middleman and I wrote plays, which are characters, dialogue, and just coming up with a good story. And there you go.
So speaking of characters, several of us up here have been in journalism before. How has that career, that field, informed the creative writing that you do, if at all?
What I love about having been a newspaper reporter is that I tell people when they say, oh, I get writer's block. I said, be a newspaper reporter. There's no such thing as writer's block. Go tell an editor you didn't get your story done by deadline because you had writer's block, you know? And so journalism is a good field for learning how to write quick and dirty. Mm-hmm. And getting your ego out of the way because it's more important to get it done and accurate, of course. I mean, accuracy, you know, and quickness. And that helps with journalism. It's like I get out of my own way to write what I have to write. And that is what makes me a good commission writer. I get a lot of commissions because I have a reputation for hitting my deadlines, being, I won't say easy to work with, but easy-ish to work with.
Okay. We'll take that.
Yes. Take that. And being open to change. Like, okay, that needs to be revised. Okay, well, I can do a revision as quick as I did the original one. So, you know, it's just, I think too many people get very precious about their writing. It's like, just write it and then worry about it after you've written it. Because in your mind, everything is wonderful, and that's why people are afraid to get it out of their mind onto the paper.
Are you preaching today?
It's preaching.
I mean, I felt like that was targeted. Erin, what about you? Because you are currently, well, both of y'all are still actively working in journalism.
Yeah. I love being edited. And that just comes from that, like the quick and dirty product that you turn into your editor has to then be polished into something that people actually can read and follow by deadline. And that means like journalism is such a collaborative field. So I really do dislike the part of creative writing where, and this is a lot like in poetry especially, but like where your work has to be pristine and perfect before it can be accepted for publication. So I really loved the process of working on my memoir and essays because we really took that manuscript and like, I mean, I think I'm an easy edit too because I just track changes. I'm like, yes. Like I'm the least precious writer ever because I know what goes into that. And I'm just, as long as it's, if you've got good chemistry with your editor too, it's like, they are just there to make you better, accept it. And everyone's going to think that you wrote it that way yourself too. So, yeah.
Kind of going on that same thread, do you feel pressure as a woman to be maybe more agreeable than you feel like a man would have to be as a writer?
Just real quick, I'm going to say that's why I said easy-ish, because I'm a Black woman. So that means anytime I disagree, no matter how nicely and sweetly, I'll just leave it at that.
No, I don't. I mean, I don't know. I don't think so. I think I'm just really like, look, I'm always I meet my deadlines, or I know how to ask and when to ask for an extension and to communicate clearly.
Say more.
But I mean, just that, like, if you need an extension, you better ask for it ahead of time, and you better give a definite deadline, and then you better make it, like, and leave room for like the answer to be no. And that's, but usually if you know like what you can communicate. But I'm also a deadline pusher. My life, I have a demanding day job and a life and such, and so often I'm writing on an assignment, either an assignment that I've given myself or one that I've sort of a challenge I've accepted, and I'm pushing it right up to then. And so anybody who wants to leap in and like help take this from like, if it's like 92% where it needs to be, like to get it to 100, I'm just grateful for the help. I don't feel like I've been put in a position yet, I guess, to where I feel like I'm being sort of like steamrolled over by an editor or being pushed further, or, when I do sort of say like, actually, this is why this is important. I think because I'm a fairly easy edit, as I say, like I'm like, yes, on all those track changes, but some things I will argue for and I'll explain it. And I think that means, like, generally speaking, because I'm not like fighting over every turn of phrase, that editors, at least when I'm editing somebody, I know, if they're really holding fast onto one thing and saying, actually, this is why it's meaningful and this is why it needs to be like this, then I'm going to say, great, thank you for saying that. Like, let's figure out then how to make it work within this. And so having been on the other side, having been being an editor also, I feel like maybe that also helps me kind of, like, how to talk to writers and how you expect to be talked to. I feel like if I was working with somebody who I didn't have that like level of respect with, I would, I love to quit things. I'll just have to tell you that. So I would probably just peace out.
So everybody up here, we all write, but we also have to pay bills, and we pay our bills with things other than writing. How do you find the balance in having a full life, but also having a full writing life?
I don't think there is a balance. I think that's sort of the misconception. I think there's times you carve out what you have to, right? So like when I'm teaching 5 or 6 classes, I'm not doing a lot of creative writing myself. But then when there's a break or a lull and I can be selfish and work on my own writing, I can do that. So I used to imagine there was this perfect balance. Like when my kids are gone during the day, I can write. And then when they're home, I'm present. But, I don't think that there is this magic formula. Sometimes you have to be selfish and maybe like not grade those papers if you have a deadline to meet, or you have to maybe be lax with deadlines or, figure that out. But I think once I stopped trying to imagine that there was this perfect way where I could wear all the hats I needed to wear in my life, and just realized sometimes I'm going to lock myself away in my study and work on this, and everybody will be okay.
I don't have kids, so I don't have that problem. But my balance is I either do it or I don't do it, and I do it on my own time. So if I'm writing until 2 a.m, there's nobody who's going to say, go to bed. But I have to get up in the morning to do work, right? So there's nobody who's going to say, oh, I'll just stay home and I work from home, but you know what I mean. It's just, it's catch as catch can. There are times in my life, like right now, I have multiple deadlines going on as a writer, and nobody cares about anybody else's deadline, right? So my work doesn't care about what my writing deadlines if I'm not, doing my work. So everything just has to get done. And I'm somebody who, for me, my balance is, I know this is going to sound terrible, knitting and TV. Like, no matter what's happening, no matter how much I got to do, okay, I got to find some time in the day to knit and to catch up on either General Hospital or The Young and the Restless. Okay, I'm lying, both.
Hey, mine is, like Law and Order or Golden Girls or Bob's Burgers or.
That's why many a play of mine has characters from things on TV. Like, if I ever become famous after I'm dead, somebody could do a whole deep dive on my characters. Ewing. That comes from her watching Dallas reruns.
Erin, and so you have a really high-paced, like, top dog kind of job. How do you find time?
Yeah, deadlines. It's all about the deadline, because the deadline then gives me, look, I like to do nothing in my free time. I like to do a lot of nothing. I can watch some TV. I can lay around. I can really lollygag with the best of them. So for me, I have to have a deadline, which I do feel then, and this is probably like the, I don't know many of my like male writer friends who talk about feeling this pressure. So maybe this is gendered. But a deadline gives me, I feel like a reason to say no to things that other people want me to do because I have a deadline. And I feel like then at least it gets respected, even if it turns into like Erin's always working when she's not working, you know. I don't have kids, which does help also with the like who needs time from me, but you know, at the same time I do have a family and I do have, you know, friends, and I do have periods in my life where I don't show up to, you know, I'm like, no, I'm not going out for drinks tonight. No, I can't go to that concert. Like, oh, you guys have fun at the festival. Like, my house is going to be empty and it's going to be quiet and I'm going to have to get some writing done. So, but for me, the deadline is the thing that like, because I also love to do nothing and I also love to have fun. So, and I hate denying myself. So, the deadline is also a way for me to keep discipline for myself, to sort of say like, I want to meet the deadline more than I want to like, blow off work this weekend and go to that festival.
That's where I'm taking some notes myself. So we're all based in Louisville. We've all been published before. I think there's a misconception that it seems like people think, oh, well, you have to, if you want to be a writer, you have to go to New York or, you know, this and that and the other. Can you talk a little bit about what you've been able to do because you're not in a New York or, you know, an LA or something like that?
Pay my bills for one.
Okay, let's talk about it.
Bingo.
I mean, I'm just saying, you know, people are like, oh, you should move to New York because, you know, theater. And I'm like, yeah, I should move to New York, but eating, you know, I
can be in Newark Airport for $250 or at LaGuardia in 2 hours, like round trip. You know, that's right. You go to New York all you want.
Right, exactly. I mean, we do live in a time with a little thing called the internet. Mm-hmm. And
I've heard of
cell phones. Mm-hmm. And, you know, God bless Zoom, because, you know, during the height of COVID, I had 3 readings, you know, like I've had friends who like, they had no theater going on. And I was like, you want to do my play? Like, yeah, we'll do it on Zoom. And I'm like, okay. I mean, one of them was in Seattle. So talk about that time difference. Like, okay. And there's a talk back afterwards. So that means midnight for me, but okay, it's a reading, you know? So, I mean, I love living in the middle of the country. Like, I'm from Kansas City. I moved here in 2020, and I just wouldn't have it any other way because I can visit. And what I love about theater is I travel. Like, I was in Arizona for a play last month. I'm going to Colorado, Boulder, Colorado for a play, you know, this weekend. And then I have a flexible job. You know, my boss doesn't care. To her, remote is remote. Remote to her is whether it's Brownsboro Road or Boulder, Colorado, as long as the work gets done, I'm good, you know.
Yeah, I have a remote job as well, which really helps. But also I'm actually getting on one of those planes and going to New York tomorrow for work, and which I do periodically. Yeah, no, when I was a kid, I definitely thought that like you had to live in New York to be a writer, and then LA to be a screenwriter. Like, but only screenwriters lived in LA. I was like, I didn't have a concept that you could write a book in Los Angeles. I have no idea why, because TV probably. But Actually, the thing that made me understand that, and I grew up mostly in West Kentucky, in Paducah, and like I didn't know any writers. You know, my mom worked at a hospital. My stepdad worked at a steel mill. Like I didn't know any writers. So what I knew of the writer life, I knew from movies mostly. And in movies, writers live in New York. But I was lucky enough to get into the Kentucky Governor's School for the Arts in high school. And that was the thing that made our faculty were practicing writers who live in Kentucky. And they were the first Kentucky writers that I'd ever met. I just had no idea that that was a thing that existed or really could be, you know. And that absolutely changed my life. It made me realize that like you could live anywhere and build a writing life and a literary life. And then once I sort of got older and then like went to grad school and sort of started looking around, I mean, writers are everywhere. There are universities for starters. So a lot of people, you know, are like, I don't know that many. I actually am thinking about, I mean, I do know a lot of writers who live in New York, but like, I'm not really sure. I mean, if I moved to New York now, which I would not necessarily be opposed to, but I would want to be making a lot more money than I do because it's so expensive now. Like you cannot just one does not simply move to New York anymore. I feel like if one wants to have a closet, but
that is not the whole apartment.
Exactly. But at the same time, I'm not really sure like why I would move to New York to become a writer at this point. There's nothing that New York has. I'm just going to be blunt. That doesn't exist in like any other city in this country for writers. There's a couple of more like really cool events, but there's also cool events kind of anywhere. There's universities.
And as you said, you can fly
everywhere.
to an event.
Right, exactly. You can go up for a reading. You can go, like when my book came out, I put together, we were coming out of like the big lockdown period. It was 2022. Things were coming back from Zoom onto, you know, into real sort of in-person events. And yeah, I had like a New York event, but I also did events, like I did an event in Cleveland, like, and it's like, there's bookstores everywhere, you know, there's a writing and a reading life everywhere. And I think that that's, Louisville is a literary city. This is my new thing. I keep saying it out loud, hoping that it's going to catch on. Louisville is a literary city. We are a literary city that does not necessarily capitalize on how literary we are. Mayor Greenberg, did you hear me? Can you hear that? Do you have this place rigged for sound? We could be doing more with that, I think. But I definitely think that like being a writer and being part of a literary community and being a literary citizen, whether you're a writer or reader or both, is really an underrated part of living in Louisville.
Because we're all based here, is there a place that you like to go when you need a little inspiration? I'm gonna start with Kelly.
That's fun. We were talking about airports because I love to eavesdrop in an airport because you hear bananas conversations. People are talking just about anything and everything. So really, I guess if I want to just eavesdrop on dialogue or characters, like you can go anywhere, right? You could go to any coffee shop in the city. You could, I mean, I don't like hang out in the airport for ideas, but if I am traveling, I do want to listen. But I also think there's lots of good walking space in this city. There's lots of places you could walk through and like be with your own thoughts, but you can also, you know, interact with other people. I like to write in my house. I'm not really a good write outside of my house kind of person.
Okay, so I got to tell you what I did, y'all, on Saturday. So I have a deadline on a play commission, and I knew that if I stayed home and wrote, I'd be all up in Traders. Anybody watch Traders? Okay, all right, y'all are really writers and readers. Okay, right. It's a reality TV show, and I was like, had several episodes of the Australia edition to watch, and so I drove to a coffee shop in Frankfort, Kentucky. I drove there because I'm like,
where the internet doesn't go.
Well, where I'm not 5 minutes away. Like at Heine Brothers on Frankfort Avenue, which is 5 minutes away, and I'm like, okay, I've done 15 minutes. Let me go home now. And, you know, so it's like by going out of town to write, it got written, and then I came home.
That is a really great idea, Michelle. I didn't think about that before, but like, I'm committed. I drove all the way to Frankfurt, so I'd better like sit here for at least as long as it takes the round trip. Right?
It's serious. Yeah. No, and I was going to go to Lexington, and then, and then it started snowing. And I was like, it'd be my luck. There's like some big ass snowstorm, and I'm stuck in Lexington, and everybody's like, "Why are you in Lexington?"
To write. Why do you think?
I'm a writer. Yeah, I'm as weird as
I mean, that's a really good idea, though, because it's imposing deadlines and tricking your brain into doing something.
I mean, I have rented hotels to write, and I'm single with no husband or live-in boyfriend, or children, or pets. There's no reason I should have to book a hotel, but I know that if I put money on it, it's going to get. I have never done that and not come out with the draft. Ooh, because I don't play that. That costs money.
Yeah, right. Erin, what about you?
I have done the I set up a, speaking of like self-directed writing retreats, I did one of those at home when I had to write what ended up being the first chapter of this book. And that was like a chapter that I knew it was basically like, it's going to be this chapter, right? It's the Woody Allen chapter. And I kind of had it labeled like that. I was like, I'll deal with that later. And then suddenly it was like, well, I need to actually write that. And so my husband was going away to some festival somewhere, I don't know. And so I was going to be at home alone for 4 days. So I took a couple of days off work, and then I had the weekend. And like, I set it up ahead of time, did my little grocery shop, prepped some really simple meals, and just said no to everything, and just shut myself up in the house, and was like, my goal is to have a draft by the end of these 4 days. And initially I had sort of thought like, oh, what if I like scoop the dog up and go to an Airbnb or something, and then it became like, oh, I gotta get someone to feed the cat. Like, it's going to be a whole thing. So but I was like, this way you won't don't regret not doing the Airbnb game, right? Like, you're going to stay home and you're going to get this done. But yeah, it has a lot to do with like giving yourself little rules and structure, at least for me, because I can burn 4 days watching, old episodes of Vanderpump Rules myself.
So earlier I asked, who was writers and who were readers in here. I've always believed that like, to be a good writer, you have to be a good reader. Good stuff, bad stuff, and everything in between. What's a book that you've read lately that has both interested you as a reader and a writer?
I have a very academic answer. I've been rereading George Eliot's Middlemarch, which I had to read for school, and I was like, eh. And then everybody's always saying that they read it all the time and they get so much out of it, and so I started rereading it, and she is a long-winded woman, and I love it. Like, I am here for it. She is really good at like bringing all these different characters together, and she was writing about the past. So like, she's writing in the late 1800s, and she's writing about the early 1800s, and all these huge changes are happening in society. And half the time I don't know what this big reform bill is that everyone's all worked up about, but you get a sense of like, people care about their society changing, right? Like, she's really good at capturing how scary that feels, but also how freeing it can feel. And she's good at writing men. She's good at writing women. So I've just been really enjoying and it's a 800-page book. Like, you are with these characters for a long time. So if you haven't read Middlemarch recently, you should, pick up that 800-pound book and dive back in.
Well, I recently read, and I had sort of picked through this before, but I really sat down and kind of read it start to finish. Lizzie Goodman's Meet Me in the Bathroom. It's the basically a really thick oral history of the indie rock revival in the aughts in New York City. And I was doing research for an essay that I was writing about the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, who were part of that scene and kind of tracked their first 3 albums and sort of the rise of that band through there. But I also just was reading it for the pleasure of like the snarky asides that made it in, and the real sort of like hearing some of the people who, you know, I had sort of consumed their art but had not maybe like read interviews with them or, you know, really knew them past the songs or what they were like on stage, like sort of getting those little insights into who they are as people, and the way that they remember things. And that's always super interesting because this was all sort of like, in hindsight, let's go back to that time, you know. So yeah, I guess it was both for, you know, extreme pleasure, but also I was reading it for research.
I have to do especially lately, a lot of reading research for the plays I'm writing and for my podcast, Race Unwrapped with Louisville Public Media.
LPM.org
yes.
/podcast.
Yes. So sorry, I had to do that plug for anybody from work who might be in the audience who's listening, who's saying, why didn't you mention your podcast? But if I'm thinking about like comfort food reading, Rex Stout's Nero Wolfe series, which is old as dirt, and the economy of language in which he can write. It's like old school detective with half the time I don't even care who got killed or who killed him. It's just because the way the author describes the characters, and like Nero Wolfe and his sidekick Archie Goodwin have just, I started reading them as a kid, which I was always reading stuff as a kid that I should not have been reading. That's both the plus and the downside of being an only child, right? It's like, you know, and I had even put all my Nero Wolfes in the basement when I went off to college, and then, you know, there was a flood, and I was like to my mother, why do you save my books? Right. Anyway, but every blue moon I go back to rereading one of those, because there's just something about knowing how something's going to end that allows you to focus on the writing. As opposed to, I love mysteries, where you're reading a mystery and you just get so lost in the mystery, you don't oftentimes catch how it's being written. But yeah, that's
a book that is on my nightstand right now that I keep coming back to is Custom of the Country, by Edith Wharton. Tara Anderson, who's a friend of a lot of folks in here, she gave it to me because I loved The Gilded Age on HBO. And she was like, have you ever read Edith Wharton? I was like, who's this? And no. I mean, shout out to public school education, but I missed her, right? And this book does character descriptions and descriptions of place so well. And Edith Wharton is really shady, right? Just like the first line is like, you know, she said with the card in her prematurely aged hand covered in gaudy rings, I was like, damn, Edith, right? And I found unexpected inspiration in that, because I would have never come to her had somebody not introduced me to her writing, and just it's helping me with my descriptions and kind of sitting with somebody and seeing all of their flaws it's been really fun. Tony, do we have time for one more question, then audience questions? Okay. So we do have a lot of writers in the room. What's one piece of advice you would give to folks who have an idea and don't know where to start, or have a novel and don't know where to go from there? Is there one piece of advice you would have heard early in your writing career that you could give them now?
Write a sentence, then write a second sentence, then write another sentence, and keep writing sentences. Speaking of our mutual friend, Tara Anderson, I just told her, you have a phone, an iPhone, a really nice iPhone. You're always carting your kids around. You know what you can do with your iPhone when you have 5 minutes here and 5 minutes there? You can write. My Google Doc contains the world. It contains the universe. Like every play I'm working on, Google Doc. Every work project, Google Doc. That means that if my phone, which it better not go anyplace, but if it disappears, goes someplace, my stuff isn't on a typewriter, sitting on a typewriter somewhere, a la Jessica Fletcher. It's in the clouds, you know. Jessica Fletcher, who moved to New York, by the way. It's like because somebody decided Murder, She Wrote. Somebody decided, well, Cabot Cove is, she can't really be a writer at Cabot Cove.
Cabot Cove's clear out of dead bodies.
Right.
Yes.
She don't have the population for that kind of action.
To NYC.
Right.
I would just like to say I'm an avid watcher of Murder, She Wrote, and it's 12 seasons, I think. And the very last episode, at least the last episode that's on Peacock, where it's streaming, they're not paying me for this, it takes place at a radio station.
Oh, I got to check that out.
Yeah, it's just... Yeah, but the wildest thing about Murder, She Wrote is that everyone knows who she is. J.B. Fletcher, the mystery writer. Like, I'm trying to get that level of acclaim, where you are in like middle of nowhere, Oklahoma, and the sheriff is like, J.B. Fletcher. That's just an aside.
It was my fault I brought up Murder, She Wrote. Sorry.
Yeah, I love it. What about you, Kelly? What do you wish you had known before you started writing?
I wish I had known that bad writing is going to happen all the time, and just to be okay with that. Like, you cannot get a good sentence or a good draft down the first time. And nobody does. Like, literally nobody does that. And I used to imagine, too, that, like, my writing process, it's like staring out the window. It's like getting up every 5 minutes to, like, walk around, and I was like, oh, but everyone else, like, sits down and they just do it, So I wish I also felt more comfortable owning my process, because, like, whatever I'm doing, it works, but it would certainly not look interesting in a Murder, She Wrote episode, right?
I think for me, it's keeping separate writing and publishing. That writing is that you can just do it for the sheer pleasure of it also, and to not have to be so worried necessarily with everything that you write about, like, how is this going to be received, or like, am I working the conventions of this genre correctly, or ruthlessly self-editing at thinking that it has to be perfect to come out. When I ask my friends who are writers, how's your writing going, and then they start talking to me about their publishing, I'm always like, that's like a separate conversation. Like, I'm interested in that too, but really, like, how is your writing going? Like, what is your writing revealing to you about yourself and how your mind works and how you perceive and enter the world, I think is so important, and it's so sacred, and it's so individual. And once you start letting, say, publishing or production into that, that becomes a different collaborative conversation. But the act of that first thing that you create is really for you. And I think that it's important to kind of like hold that close and keep it a little safe for a little while too.
And just a bonus tip, and don't edit while you're writing. Just write it. Just write it. I know so many people who will write something like on a Tuesday and then on a Wednesday go back and edit. Stop it. Just stop it. Finish it and then go back and revise it. Because that's that perfectionism thing that makes you think, well, I don't have the right to move forward until what I've written is perfect. There is no such thing as perfect. It's just done.
Yeah, I think somebody once told me, like, perfection is the enemy of completion or something like that. Like, just get it done.
Perfection is boring.
Well, we could keep going because I actually do have a lot of questions, but we want to open it up to y'all. What questions do you have for the panel? And Tony is going to walk around with the mic. If you want to raise your hand for questions, we still have some time. So,
hi. So what is your favorite thing to do when you're in need of feedback? So, because I am going to start writing my book this year, but I don't know anybody who's a writer, and I don't really know anybody here in Louisville. So,
well, you know 4 people now who are writers.
So, like, I didn't know what you did because, like, online forums, they exist and they're fun or whatever. But I didn't know if you guys had like people in your community that you knew in real life who would give you feedback for what it is that you're writing.
First of all, I just want to say, Missouri Tigers, hello there, okay.
I'm from Columbia.
I graduated from law school at MU, so here you go, so you can
boom, connection
you got
already.
Connection, right? Okay. I I kind of accidentally fell into feedback, and that when I first started, it makes me laugh that when I wrote my very first play, I had to ask a friend of mine who at the time was in her late 70s and who had always wanted to be an actress, if she could meet me at the Starbucks to read my play out loud. And now, like when I go home to Kansas City, I can't go to a play without bumping into 50 people I know. And so, your group comes as you just keep doing it. Like, it's okay to not know anybody and not have feedback. It's okay to write it and then seek out the feedback. You know what I mean? Like that will come in time.
Yeah, I think sometimes if you get feedback too early, that can kind of like mess up your creative process, at least for me. And there's the part of me that wants that validation. Like I want the feedback to say, keep going. But I don't want the feedback to be like, this doesn't work. I'm like, I didn't come for that, right? But I have like readers. Well, I have a friend who's like a bookstagrammer, because that's a thing in 2024, right? But she's a bookstagrammer. She is a micro influencer about books on Instagram. Is what that means.
Not have my Prince face on.
Yeah. But it's really good because it gets people to read. So I'm sorry, my age is showing. She's the person who, like, when I'm done with a draft, I'll send something to her because I trust her opinion because I know she reads a lot. Right. And she's not necessarily a writer in the same way that I am, because like the feedback I would get from one of these panelists is going to be different than from somebody who's just an avid reader and doesn't write in like poetry or creative nonfiction or whatever, because like they're going to give me notes kind of about like craft and form and things like that, which are very, very valuable. But also don't be afraid to just have that person in your life, like who's a friend or, a family member or whomever, that you trust their opinion as somebody who likes to read.
And I would say if you want to meet other writers also, if you're new to Louisville or just new to literary community, a great place. I don't know where open mics are these days, but they have to exist, right? I'm sorry, I don't get to leave my house very much, but if I ever meet my deadlines. But open mics, I feel like are or readings or any sort of like literary event. But I feel like open mics, because there is that like open participatory angle to it, is that, sign up to read, a 2-minute snippet of what you're working on, and you're going to meet other people who are reading the work that they're working on as well, and like you've already got something in common. And I found like those when I was at that stage, that was a really great place to kind of meet people who were also looking for other friends who write too.
And even coming to events like this, like free events, I know Spalding, each semester has like open community workshops and readings and things like that. So you can meet other folks without, you don't need to go and get your graduate degree. You know what I mean? But just kind of being aware, taking advantage of opportunities like this, like come up here after and get our contact information. You know what I mean? But yeah, you're on the right track already.
Well, my question was going to be, as a new writer, like how do you build your network? And then if y'all had any suggestions, which y'all kind of did, but if you have anything on like how to build your network, I know that I'm into like playwriting and screenwriting, but I know like there's different ways, there's different places, organizations or anything like that. So if y'all have any suggestions for like professional like organizations or anything like that as well.
Well, I will say that theater is the most communal of the arts. I mean, once you become friends with other theater people, then you sort of have a community of itself. It's funny because when I started my program at Spalding, I actually lived in Kansas City, and just coincidentally, indirectly because of this one, I got a job as a producer here in Louisville, and I'm like, oh, I can finish my degree quicker because I don't have to pay to travel here. I live down the street from Brown. But even though I graduated in May 2022, like every residency is like the playwrights get together. Like even playwrights who've graduated come from out of town. And if you meet other theater people, then you build that bond. I don't know how novelists do it. I don't know how poets do it, but I guess they have friends, but
Erin, do poets have friends?
Yes, because only poets want to hang out with other poets. No, I'm kidding. I was just going to say, 10-minute play festivals, there's a lot of the small community theater companies here in Louisville. I think several of them will do a 10-minute play festival each year. And so I think that's I would say, like, even, yes, submit your work, but also if you go to shows locally, find those companies that you like the work that they're doing, especially if they're doing original work or at least some original work. And, say, hey, I want to volunteer. Can I usher? Can I seat people? Can I work on the show a little bit? And because everybody always and I think that that's overall a really good note for, like, how do you build literary community in any way, is you show up to the place where people are doing the thing that you want to do and you say, how can I help? Put me to work. Because somebody will, and that way you're showing up and you're saying, like, I have something of value to add, even if it's just moving boxes, right? But, like, somebody needs you to help and you want to be there, that means everything. And writers are always, I think, any kind of artists, like, we're always just super excited to meet other people who are into the things that we're into, because we're not into, like, I don't know, mining Bitcoin or whatever it is that makes a lot of money, So, right, like, we're just out here, like, doing our weird little, like, making things up and hoping other people like it thing. So when we meet other people who like to do the same thing and they're like, hey, can I do it with you? Chances are it's like, yeah, go stand there and let people in and show them to their seats. And then before you know it, you're, like, on the board.
Right. So true. I think one thing that, because there's this thing called the internet that really is helpful in meeting other writers. If there's a writer whose work that you like, reach out to them on social media and tell them, like, hey, I just really liked that, without necessarily, like, looking for something in exchange, because I think any writer would love for somebody to reach out to them and be like, I really loved your work. You know what I mean? But especially if they're a local writer, like, going to readings at Carmichael's and things like that, to just be like, hey, I really dug that, whatever, and see if they have more events coming up, or see if they have, like, groups or recommendations or anything like that. I hate the term networking. I see it as just like, ooh, hanging out with cool people that I want to be friends with. Because I feel like so many of the connections I've made as a writer in Louisville haven't been professional. Like, I'm friends with these people, right? Because these are people I like and I genuinely want to get to know. And I don't see it necessarily as, like, I'm trying to get something out of this. I see it as, agree. Yeah, I see it as, I want to grow my community and know more people and learn, right? So I think going in with that mindset and being patient as well, because you're not going to, in a week have, like, a group of 10 writing buddies, right? But maybe in a year you will.
And I also think it's important to be careful, and I got to say this tactfully, to not find excuses for why you don't write.
Ouch.
Seen, attacked, yes.
You know what I mean? Like, it's just, I've seen so many people do it. Like, they can make an excuse that, like we were talking about earlier, I don't live someplace. I don't know anybody who writes. I don't, there are a million ways to find, I have kids, I have a husband with sciatica, people come up with reasons, and writing is the lowest bar of art you can do. You can script. Everybody in this room probably has a phone. You got here somehow. Everybody has some device. If you got a device, you can write. If you got paper, if your devices all, you can't pay your electricity bill, then go buy a notebook. You can always write, and nobody has to see a damn thing you write until you have written 10 books, if that's what you choose to do.
In the back.
Oh, hi. I actually have 2 questions, but you inspired a second. To your point about not finding an excuse to write, or not making an excuse not to write. My question was related to reading, and they're kind of the same relationship. How would you encourage college students that are experiencing book burnout, or, like, their love of reading is dying because of their demanding course load? and not to lose that, because I took some time away from school, and I've just now gotten back to my love of reading and enjoying like children's books, and it's been a really beautiful experience. So thoughts on that?
Well, I was going to say, like, put your phone down sometimes, right? Like, I think like when we're endlessly scrolling, that takes away from our desire to actually want to read something longer. But also when you're in school and you have to read something, right? And it's like you're being forced to, it's like, you know, your mom's asking you to unload the dishwasher and you do it, but you're not happy about it, right? But then when you're out of school, like, you get to read whatever you want. And if you want to read like sci-fi, fantasy, if you want to read children's books, like, then you should just read what you want to, if it's super long or super short, right? Because no one is telling you what you have to read and there's no quiz on it. So just remembering your love of reading, that only comes from choosing what you want to read, not what everyone is telling you you have to read or you should read.
I would also suggest a technique is try audiobooks if you haven't before. Yes. Because that can, it is still reading, but it's experiencing reading in a different way. And so maybe that's also, sometimes it's about like tricking your brain into remembering why it liked something in the first place.
Okay, so I have a weird, it's not weird. So is anybody like a Prime Amazon member? Get that 2-day shipping? Okay. Well, one feature of Prime is that they have first reads. So every month they'll send you an email. And you it's not easy to find, but you can find it. And you sign up, and at the beginning of every month they're like, hey, you get a free ebook. You know, you can download a free ebook. Here's the ones you can choose from, right? So I went through a phase where every month I would download a book. Just every month. Never read them. Just download them. I'm like, boom. So then I got an iPad, which, you know, is up here. And I was like, you know, let me start reading some of these books. And so most of the books that they suggest are either like historical fiction or suspense, which are two genres I wouldn't normally seek, right? But then I'm like, well, I got this iPad and I got all these free books. I'm just going to read what I have. It got me back into reading because I had been... And I think for a lot of us who worked in journalism let me not speak for everybody, but for me as a journalist working during the pandemic, during racial justice protests, I didn't want to consume anything at all heavy, right? It was just like, no, I'm burnt out. I can't handle this. The most I can read is a People magazine, right? But in reading a genre that I wouldn't have necessarily picked on my own, it kind of reinvigorated this like interest, right? And I read lots of good books and lots of terrible ones, right? Like, but the terrible ones inspired me because I'm like, if this terrible book can get published,
I knew exactly where you were going, exactly.
Then whatever I'm writing could get published too. Right? And then you read terrible books and you're like, don't do that. Don't do that. I'm not going to do that. But then you discover gems that you wouldn't otherwise read. So I suggest signing up for that. And just like, I mean, some of them are like wild thrillers, you know, like that you're like, what is this even about? Like one was kind of like about the NXIVM cult, but not, if anybody's into like cult. Well, I hope you're not into cults, but you know what I mean? Like I just read some wild things and that got me excited about reading again.
Okay, thank you for answering. And then my next question was, in honor of Women History Month, how have you celebrated yourself through your career in such a fast-paced working environment like journalism when there's always another upcoming deadline?
Ooh. Is the question, how do we celebrate ourselves?
Personally, like individually, how have you celebrated yourself with your success of writing and just pushing and moving forward and sharing your stories?
Oh. How do you celebrate yourself amidst the chaos of deadlines?
I don't know if I celebrate myself. I just live life. You know, I mean, like for example, this Boulder trip for a play. since they're paying for me to come out there anyway, I'm like, okay, can you pay for me to come out there 2 days early? I just said, I'll take care of myself. You don't have to pay for anything other than that. And so I'm taking myself to Hot Springs. Like I find ways to build in things at all times. Like when I was in Arizona last month, I was like, I've never been to the Grand Canyon. So I took a day to drive to the Grand Canyon, so it's just, to me, celebrating life is about living life, which is the celebration is the joy. And then like this weekend, I was just telling my fellow panelists how I went home to Kansas City because I had to see 2 friends who had new babies, 2 separate sets of friends. 2 friends had plays. One, I watched a play that one friend directed, surprised another friend who had a play that he wrote, and then there's family. I got to see my mother and my stepdad. To me, living life is the celebration. I know that's corny, but
that's awesome. I think as I've gotten older, I've realized more and more that I don't need to be humble about what I've been able to achieve. I low-key think that for women, being humble is a trap. Because like, I'm sure this is a great panel. These are great writers, right? But I think it's easy for us as women to kind of like make ourselves smaller because that's what society teaches us to do, to put everybody else first and to be humble and just so grateful for the opportunity, right? I'm grateful to be here, but I also recognize that I've worked really, really hard. And there's nothing wrong with recognizing that we've achieved success because we worked our asses off for it.
I was raised by 3 people, my grandparents and my mother. They had a high school diploma between them. I have 3 degrees now. So right there, I'm good. You know what I mean? Like I have made the ancestors proud. If I don't do anything else, I'm good. There's a hand there.
2 questions. What is your next project? And can we go ahead and get information before you get bombarded up there and everybody won't be able to get all the information? So can we go ahead and get information early?
You can find me on Twitter, Diva of Diversity. That's probably the easiest way. Diva of Diversity. Yeah.
And what's your next project?
Well, the project.
She has so many.
Actually, it's kind of a handful. The project in Boulder is a play of mine called Chasing Breadcrumbs that I wrote last year. Sorry. Thank you, Tony. My dear friend Tony, that I wrote last year. I got mad when I came back from Florida from another play festival where this rich white woman said, I loved your play, but why can't you make all the characters white? Why do they have to be black? And so I came back home and wrote one hell of a full-length play. Let's just say I was inspired. And so I submitted it to something and they picked it, and so I'm going to Boulder. So yeah. And so I'm doing revisions before I go there so that I don't have to do too many revisions when I get there.
So Diva of Diversity on social, play in Boulder if anybody has Boulder money, and lpm.org/podcasts for Race Unwrapped. What about you, Kelly?
I am not really on social media a lot, but I know I have an Instagram author page, and I've completely forgotten the name of it. I think it's like Kelly Hill Author or Kelly Writes.
So give you a Google.
Yeah, maybe do that. And I'm working on a novel, and I'm a very, very, very slow writer. So it's not happening anytime soon. And I also have found that if I tell people what I'm writing about, I want them to say, that sounds amazing. And when I don't get that reaction, it's sort of deflating. So I tend to not tell people what I'm actually writing. So it's a novel. It has people. and
places and things.
And there's things happening, yeah.
Okay.
That's a good tip. That's a really quick good tip too. Don't talk too much about what you're writing about. Just write it.
Yeah.
Ooh. And Kelly, March 19th.
March 19th. Yes. And my book comes out March 19th and my reading's on the 20th. And I would love for anyone here to come out and
what's the name of your book again?
It's called A Home for Friendless Women.
Erin, what do you have coming up?
I'm currently competing in. I made it past round 1, the March Xmas Tournament of Songs. This year, it's the theme is March Danceness. It's a bracket of 64 original essays. Each essay written about a song, and every year the tournament has a theme. This year it's dance songs from the aughts. So this was my Yeah Yeahs, Heads Will Roll essay. People vote online. You're matched up against, you're seated and you're matched up against another song. So when round 2 starts, hopefully I will be vanquished, I'm sure, because in round 2 I will be facing Britney Spears' Toxic. Yeah, I mean, I'm just happy to be here in the game. Everybody, just happy to be here in the game. And I'm eek she cried on most socials, and I have to say that the most aspirational thing I have heard in a long time is, I have an author Instagram page, but I'm struggling to remember what it's even called. I'm like, that's such goals, man. I want to have an author Instagram page that I have no control over, that somebody set up for me and like does cool things on, and I go, I don't know, man. It's out there somewhere. That's so amazing, Kelly. Like, I want to be you when I grow up.
I'm working on a memoir of essays. Taking my fellow panelists' advice, and I'm not going to tell y'all about it. And you can find me all over social at Ashleé Eats, and it's Ashleé with 2 E's.
Sorry, real quickly. I know everybody's wrapping up, but going back to your point about Louisville as a literary city, and we could capitalize on that more. Do you have ideas or suggestions about how we could grow our literary community?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Sit tight.
So for starters, all of that empty office space that's sitting in this beautiful downtown of ours, I think that, public-private partnerships could turn a lot of that space into community arts space, a la sort of like the storefront theater movement in Chicago. We could be doing a lot of that, I think, with not just for theater and theater groups and for playwrights, but also for art installations, art performances, art gatherings. So yes, more readings around town, more literary festivals, more central meeting points for people to coalesce around. And I think that that's the one thing that Louisville lacks that Lexington has. I'm so sorry to the sibling rivalry, but Lexington has the Carnegie Center for what is it, learning and literacy? Yes. Yeah. And even outside, I mean, yes, there's the University of Kentucky and there's Transylvania University, but really the Carnegie Center functions as such a gathering spot there for the literary community in so many different ways. And because Louisville doesn't have a big, gorgeous building that says, hey, writing happens here, labeled on it, that's open to everybody in the community, we're a lot more dispersed, a lot more atomized around the whole county. So in my dream would be that there would be some sort of designated place, and maybe that is the Louisville Free Public Library here, centrally located right here on York Street, that is like the place where it's like the clearinghouse, the hub for all of the different literary communities that exist in Louisville to be able to interact with each other and cross-pollinate and create amazing things. I don't know. But I do feel like there's a lot more that the city could do if we just get that literary city going. I'm going to see one of these days it'll be in the airport on the posters next to the bourbon chefs with the tattooed arms.
I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 quick questions.
As I'm walking this way, I would like to say that if you received an email from me, I can send out all the information that they mentioned about their books and things and whatnot, and their Instagrams and whatnot. I'll just send it to you in an email.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. I was thinking about it, and I wasn't going to ask it, but I'm going to ask it because it's a journey I'm going through in my midlife passage or middle passage. Do you feel successful now? And is it the success you thought you'd find 20, 30 childhood years ago?
I do feel like a success now. I could have never pictured the life that I'm living 20 years ago, or even 5 years ago, to be perfectly honest. I think for me, I had to define what success meant for me, right? And to also realize that like what success is for me might not be the same as what it is for you or anybody else. Because, you know, like we've mentioned on this panel, maybe success, it isn't getting a book published, but maybe it's writing a book. You know, that is success, you know? So I think for me, as I get older, I realize that I have to define success for me. And that it's okay if it doesn't look like somebody else's version of success.
You know, success is such an odd word. You know, it's just, I mean, I feel success because not just as a writer. I mean, I turned 60 this year, and to be almost 60 and to have the support system that I have, like that, sorry, I'm a crier. I can hear my best friend now going, don't cry. But to have the support system that I have, like no matter what I do, like if I never publish, not that I'm published, but if I never produce, have another play produced, I'm still loved, you know? And that matters more than, it makes the other things happen. It's not the other, it's not like, oh, I'm successful, so I'm loved. It's I'm loved, so I get to do what I love.
Ooh. That's beautiful. I'm not going to follow that.
Well, Erin, what about you? Because as somebody who like started, you know, you've done poetry, journalism.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like maybe if I could focus on one thing instead of always wanting to try all the things, that maybe that is I don't know, faster, but maybe more direct path to like success, whatever that means. But I guess I really had a reckoning with myself.
May I have your attention, please? The library will close in 30 minutes.
So wrap it up, Keane, wrap it up. No, like I had this.
There you go.
I had this laugh because
yes.
if that had happened in the middle of what I was saying, I'd have been like, my best friend put them up.
No, I think I just, you know, at some point a few years ago, I just kind of had a reckoning with myself and realized that I'm not an ambitious person, and in the way that I used to think that I was, which is to say that I am not. What I realized about myself is that I'm actually not a competitive person. And realizing that about myself made me feel a lot more comfortable in like letting opportunities pass me by. Honestly, just saying like, no, I'm not really feeling it. Or I guess I could work toward that, but like at what cost? So I really started just to look for things anyway that just felt more right to me or made sense to me. So I guess success to me is, success means freedom and autonomy. So if I can reach that in some way, then that's always what I'm sort of moving myself toward in order to be able to do, to follow whatever, you know, oh, I want to try this genre now, or, oh, I want to like immerse myself in this project that I'm really passionate about right now, rather than having to continue along a line that has been laid out for me in one narrow path.
Was that the last one?
Well, they're about to kick us out. So,
all right. Well, yeah, they're going to kick us out. You can't go home, but you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here, etc.
Can't stay here.
But I would just want to say really quick, thank you all so much for coming out this evening. Y'all have been a great crowd. Thank you to Tony for organizing all of this. And thank you so much to the panelists. Y'all are amazing, inspirational, aspirational. Yes to everything.
Thank you, Ashleé.
Thank you, Ashleé.